More people are in the backcountry, more people have satellite communicators, and more people are asking for a backcountry rescue. You might have also seen an uptick in news stories about states or municipalities saying that they're going to be starting to charge people for search and rescues. It's all kind of confusing. I wanted to definitively answer the question, who pays for a backcountry rescue? So I asked some of my friends in the search and rescue community, and I also reached out to the National Association for Search and Rescue. Its executive director, a guy named Chris Boyer, was gracious enough to not only give me some of his time to talk through the question, but also give me an answer to it that's very succinct and very workable, which I will share with you. Before we dive in here, let me just say that I'm going to be primarily talking about the United States, but from what I hear from the people I spoke with, the same concepts apply to most countries around the world. And if you're ever in doubt as to who will cover the cost of a backcountry rescue, you can always call the park directly before you go there and ask them what the procedure is, what the policy is, and get a definitive answer. But like I said, this should work for pretty much everywhere you're going to go. Also, you will not see me trying to sell you things in this video. That's because this video is supported by users like you. So thank you for doing that. If you think guides like this are helpful for hikers in the outdoors community, please consider supporting. You can give me a thumbs up, and you can also share with anybody in your hiking community who you think might benefit from hearing this as well. All right, I'm not going to bury the lead here, so let me just tell you the answer that Chris Boyer supplied, which was great. You don't pay for a backcountry rescue, but you may pay for negligence. You don't pay for a backcountry rescue, but you may pay for negligence. So we'll dive deeper into that so you feel confident in that answer and know what negligence is, but that's the gist of it. So let's rewind a second and just talk about when it's okay to ask for help in the backcountry, because it's another good question. I reached out to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Search and Rescue maybe a year or two ago now, and they gave me another very elegant answer. They said, when you're unsure of a safe outcome, it's okay to ask for help. So ask for help when you're unsure of a safe outcome. And what is a safe outcome, or why are people asking for help in general? Well, luckily, Garmin released a study of 10,000 in-reach rescues, and there's basically three buckets they all fall into. One is like a medical problem or an injury. Another one is if you're stuck, stranded, or lost. And another one is a vehicle problem. So your vehicle breaks down outside a cell phone range where you can call a tow truck. It's okay to hit the inReach button. So that's why people are doing this. And one of the things that everyone I spoke to in the search and rescue community stressed is they never want you to hesitate to ask for help because you think there might be a charge. They never want you to hesitate to ask for help because there might be a charge. Number one, they want you to be safe and all set and not, get into trouble. But number two, time is a commodity. So in a rescue situation, if you have, maybe it's a health condition that's deteriorating, time is a commodity. Daylight, right? Time, daylight, that's a commodity. It's much easier to rescue you when it's daylight and it's light out than it is to wait until it's dark and now it's something that's going on in the middle of the night. So time's a commodity. Don't ever hesitate to hit the button if you're in doubt of the cost. And hopefully by the end of this video, you won't be in doubt about the cost, and I'll tell you some things that you can do to make sure that you won't ever have to pay for one. An advantage of having a satellite communicator like an inReach is that you can have a two-way, essentially text conversation with the emergency services or the emergency coordinator, and you can do that without necessarily initiating a rescue and necessarily incurring the costs of a rescue, right? So if you're out hiking, you're in the backcountry, and you see fire, and you're wondering if this wildfire is going to impact you or threaten you, or a weather condition or a health condition, you can always hit the SOS button on a device like the inReach and communicate with the emergency coordinators, get more information about your situation. That costs you nothing. It's always better to do that, be sure, and get their input on what's going on. It doesn't cost you anything. That's included with the inReach subscription, so don't hesitate to do that. If you need help, you can do it. You can also cancel the SOS on your inReach device directly if it's all over, so it's always better to ask for help. What does a backcountry rescue cost? Let's just define what we're talking about first. We're talking about getting you from the backcountry, someplace that's inaccessible by normal means, to the front country and to help. So maybe that's a helicopter that gets you out of a wilderness situation, flies you directly to a hospital. Maybe that's a ground team that brings you out in a litter, like a stretcher, to an ambulance in the front country. We're talking about the cost to get you out of the back country. Once you get into an ambulance and you're in the front country, then it's something that's normally included with insurance or whatever. We're talking about the cost to get you from the back country to the front country and then to safety. Now, you might be surprised to know that 99.9% of the people who work in search and rescue are volunteers. Not only do they volunteer their time and risk their lives, but they also pay for their own training with time, with money. They pay for their own gear. Sometimes there's minor subsidies and grants that they get to help offset those costs, but the bottom line is that you're not paying for people to come and rescue. That's all done by people who are very brave. And if you ever want to give back to the search and rescue or the outdoor community, please consider supporting your local search and rescue organization, whether that's with your time, becoming a volunteer, or with money. That's a place where I think your help would probably go a long way. But search and rescue, you're not talking about human costs, you're talking about the hard costs. And generally, that's going to be a helicopter or an aircraft. Now, there isn't a national figure for the average cost of a search and rescue, but from looking at different news stories and costs, it's somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 for your average search and rescue that lasts a few hours and involves a helicopter. I did find the average cost for Kings County, Washington, which is I think the Seattle-Tacoma area, and that's $6,000 to $7,000 for your average search and rescue with a helicopter. So that's the cost we're talking about here. All right, let's get into the soft, gooey center of this. What is negligence? What is negligence? And when I think of negligence, I think that's something different depending on who you are. If you've been going into the backcountry for years, negligence is much different than if you've just been hiking for a week or two and get into trouble in the backcountry. So what's used is something called the reasonable person standard, the reasonable person standard. And what that says is what would a reasonable person do in the same situation? And the example that was given to me was there's a stop sign. If you run the stop sign and crash into another car, you would be negligent because a reasonable person would stop at a stop sign. And there is a difference between being negligent and being reckless. We're not going to get into that, but just know that the reasonable person standard is what you will be judged against. So when I looked at all of the different cases where people were actually charged or threatened to be charged with negligence, the number one thing that stood out was people ignored warning signs. So there was a sign that the trail was closed or not to go off the trail or not to pass a certain point, and people did it anyway. And those were the people who got charged with negligence, definitely the most by far. If you've ever been to Yosemite National Park and gone up the Mist Trail up to Nevada Falls, there are probably a dozen signs that say, don't go past this fence, don't go in the water, people die here every year, and 100% of the time you will see people pass that fence and in the water. So if you're willing to do something like that, I think you're opening yourself up for a charge of negligence. Also worth noting is people are making really, really bad decisions beyond, common sense. And one of the things that jumps out was an article I read about a family with two very small children who went in on a hike in the mountains in New Hampshire, a 7-mile hike in the mountains, two small children, late afternoon, no water, no headlamps, no nothing, and they needed help. So, make good choices, be prepared. I'll tell you how to be prepared in a second, but one of the other things to note is that very, very few people actually got charged with negligence. There's a lot of stories where they were considering charging with negligence, but the actual number of people who were charged with negligence was very, very small. If you do get charged with negligence, know that it's a fine or a ticket, right? So you can contest that in court. If you have prepared and you're like, I'm not negligent, I've prepared and I got into legitimate trouble, you can go to court and contest that charge. So good to know. And if you really just want to take the costs completely off the table, I don't think it works if you're just explicitly negligent. But if you're not sure and you want to take all of the costs out of the equation, if you're an inReach user, you can opt into optional. You can opt into rescue insurance. I think it's about $40 a year, and that will help offset the cost or will pay for the cost of any kind of backcountry rescue, just in case you got charged for it. If you're not an inReach user, you can buy private insurance. I think if you're a member of the American Alpine Club, you can buy insurance through them as well. So if you just want to take it off the table, that's the good way to do it. But otherwise, do your research on the hike, make sure that you can actually do it, not only from a skill perspective and a navigation perspective, but also from a physical perspective. Going on a long hike in the backcountry is not a place necessarily to push yourself like you would in a marathon where you have like an ambulance at every mile marker. Check the park website, make sure there's no closures, make sure the trails are in condition. Check the weather, make sure the weather conditions are good. Carry the 10 essentials. If you don't know what the 10 essentials are, just search for Hiking Guy, hiking essentials, and I have a whole article on it. Make sure you're prepared. I'd also highly recommend bringing a satellite communicator like the Garmin inReach. You can do two-way communications, and it's an easy way to help in a lot of different problems. You can get weather reports on that, and you can also tell your family if you're running late. So if you are running late, they might not necessarily have to call for a search and rescue if you're okay and you're just walking back in the dark or whatever it may be. So if you do those things, if you prepare for a hike, I think you should be more than fine in terms of a negligence charge. One last thing I want to mention that didn't even occur to me until Chris Boyer brought it up. I didn't even know this went on, but I wanted to share with you because it's important. Maybe you should share it with your families. There is a fallacy that you have to wait 24 or 48 hours to report a missing person. It's something that comes from television. It's entirely false, but what happens is that people think they have to wait 24 or 48 hours, and what do? They post something on social media that says, my son or daughter was lost on this trail. If you know anything, call this number or contact us. And evidently, there are people out there who fancy themselves as search and rescue personnel, whether they are good-intentioned or not, well-intentioned or not. They're out there and they will contact the family and they will start a private search and rescue, which may or may not work, usually doesn't work. And at the end of it, they don't find whoever they're looking for, and all of this time has passed that they could have had an official search and rescue that probably would use aircraft and all of the resources available to whatever search and rescue organization is running it. So don't ever pay for a private search and rescue. Don't wait to call if you think somebody is missing. What I do, it's real simple. I just basically tell a loved one when I'm going hiking. I tell them when I think I'm going to be back and when I think I'm going to contact them. And I say, I should be calling you around 4 o'clock. If you don't hear from me by 7 o'clock, call local law enforcement and tell them that I am missing so they can start a proper backcountry search. So worth mentioning to your family. And again, if you have a satellite communicator, you can just tell your family that you're running late without initiating an SOS. And it's a very handy way to kind of solve that problem. Thank you so much for watching the video. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you did, if you can give me a thumbs up, I appreciate it. And if you know other people who would benefit from seeing this video, please share it with them. I think the less people in the backcountry hesitating to hit the SOS button because they think it's going to cost them money, the better. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments on YouTube. I'm pretty good at answering all of them. I'll do my best to answer yours. And if you don't have a satellite communicator yet, I highly recommend getting one. I'm using the Garmin inReach Mini 2 right now. I'll put a link to that video up on the screen. It costs a few bucks, but for me, it's worth it because it means it can potentially save my life. All right, guys, have fun out there. Be safe, and I'll see you out on the trails.